Welcome to the Manager Matt podcast show. The show is designed to give you solutions to your day-to-day management and leadership problems. It's hosted by Matthew Haddock, a frontline manager and leader with over 25 years of experience. If you're ready, then let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Manager Matt podcast show, a weekly show designed for you as a leader and manager to get the results you've always wanted. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the show so you can never miss an episode and share it with anyone else who might get the benefit. Right, without any more delay, let's get on with this week's show. Welcome to this week's Manager Matt podcast show. I hope you're all very, very well and doing what you needed to do to get the best out of your people and get the results that you want. This week's show, I want to talk around a subject which is in the press quite a bit at the minute, which is a good thing because we're just well, it depends when you listen to this, but we've had our International Mental Health Day, which is a day where people take the time to consider the mental health of the people around them and themselves and the family. And it's a good time to reflect on both yourself, how you feel at work, how you feel in life in general, and how your family are feeling and your loved ones around you, how are their mental health and your friends, and also your team. Mental health is a big element of the work a leader needs to do in the modern world. It's become a topic, thankfully, for more of an open discussion. I do remember, probably going back 10 or 12 years now, that it was in a very, very different place. I think mental health definitely as a subject was not talked about, wasn't really understood. I still think it isn't well understood and isn't talked around as much as it could be. But going back 10, maybe 12 years now, I remember having a conversation around a manager. So we were both about the same level, shift manager at the time. I won't mention where I were working. And this one manager was talking around another colleague who'd had some issues. And looking back, he'd obviously had some mental health issues due to some pressure at work and away from work. And he'd had some time off. And the other manager I was talking to basically said that in his view of the world and in the corporate world that he was living in, that was the end of that guy's career. I mean, that's shocking, isn't it, when you think about it now? But his understanding was that due to the fact that he'd showed weakness almost, which again is such a dated idea, that the pressure had snapped him and there was no way that anyone would trust him to lead a senior project or trust him to put into a position of leadership. And it's completely changed, thankfully, from those days, but it sounds so old-fashioned. It isn't even that long ago that those conversations were having. And I think that's still a legacy today when you talk around the impact of mental health and you talk around people and the people that you lead, the managers and especially men, because I'm going to get onto the topic of men and their mental health. But if they're seen as a weakness to have a mental health issue or even asking for some support around an issue, then obviously you can see why people aren't as open to coming forward and saying it, because why would they? If they think it's going to be career ending, that the whole way of working, the way that they're being brought to a job would be finishing due to that. It sounds nonsense, but that's what people thought, and I think that's still around in some ways. And the impact of mental health, the issue, it's massive on a leader because it's around the people. And as I say on this cast all the time, the people are the people you need to deliver everything, And if they're not in a good headspace and they don't have a supportive network around them and they can't feel that they've got your support or the support of your company, then you are going to have problems with those individuals performing. And of course, the moral implications of actually just doing the right thing for people. You want to be moral, you want to make sure you're looking after your people, and that's the basics of it. And what happens when you don't have a place of safety where people can feel that they are listened to and they have a chance to speak? Well, firstly, you see absences go up. Now, here in the UK, figures just come out that the average person now is taking 7 days per year off due to stress and mental health in some respects. I mean, that's an average. We know what statistics are like, but that's much higher than it's ever been, even higher than when we were in COVID. Suicide is the biggest killer of men under the age of 35. Now, that is a scary, scary fact. And in the world, nowadays you'd have thought there's so much connectivity, so much information, there's so much you can reach out and get help. You think that there'd be times where men, especially, as I say men, but obviously women, would be able to talk this through and get to the bottom of what's gone wrong. But it's even worse because the pressures of society have come on them. But let's step away from the bigger society, because there's the macro and the micro level, and let's look at what you do, what you as a manager do, and how you as a leader in your business can approach mental health and how you can deal with it and maybe help in the way you can improve the way that you work at it. First thing is, I always say look after yourself first, and that's not being selfish at all. That's just being making sure that if you are right in yourself, then you can help others. They always say on the plane, if you ever get on a plane, I'm sure you've all travelled on aeroplanes, they always say put your own safety equipment on first before you help others. So either your air mask if it dropped from the sky. God, I don't know what I'd do if one of them masks dropped from the sky, because I don't know how it works. I'm always too scared of pulling it too hard and it coming off. But yeah, they always say put yours on first. Put your own mask on before you help others. And that's the same in this instance. You need to look after yourself. You need to understand the pressures that you're on and the way that you can measure the pressure that you need to be at work. Pressure's not always a bad thing. You need the correct pressure to make you be successful. There's nothing wrong with that. But you need to understand what pressures are there and how much it's affecting you. And is there a chance that you become burnt out? And hit that point, you're going to get pushed in work, and the higher up the organisation you go, there will be expectations on you. But one thing, and I remember doing some training on this, because I am a fully trained mental health first aider, and it stuck with me around this idea of a bucket. And you've got a bucket, and it's starting to fill in with a funnel at the top, and your bucket and your funnel are filling with the things you've got to do today, not just at work, but outside of work. Your children, your family, your social life, your bills are all piling into this thing. And at the bottom, you've got the ways you relieve it. So that might be through exercise, it might be through social networks, it might be just in the work itself. And that's okay. You can balance this bucket, this funnel, until it gets too much. And when it gets too much and the way you can vent it is becoming restricted, or there's an issue, or you've got more in this funnel than you had, then it overflows. And that overflow is when you become burnt out, the pressure gets to you, and you have your own episodes. So realistically, you need to make sure that you're right. And that means opening up, being okay with being vulnerable, speaking to people around it, have a good network of friends or family, and even work friends. There's nothing wrong with having a good work friend that you can talk these things through. And of course, having the confidence to speak to your bosses, or your boss, and talking them through what pressure is. And sometimes just taking some time away. Speak to your boss and say, this is too much. I've got a plan, but I need a bit of time. I think most bosses, or I would, especially being a boss, would respect people saying that. But make sure that you are looking after yourself and you've got that right ones. And then, of course, it's down to your directs. So what are you doing with your directs? How do you make sure that they are right? How do you make sure that the things they do are not impacting on them too much in the mental health world? I mean, we keep people safe at work all the time. If you think of things you do, if you're at work anyway, you need to be looking at how you risk assess people, how you train them. Do you have the right guards in place to make sure that they're safe at work? Have they got the correct PPE? Is there safe working practices in place? You do all that, don't you? You would do all that, and you do all that as a good leader. But when it comes to mental health, are we doing the same as a manager? When you look at the idea of mental health in the workplace and for your directs, how do you manage that? How do you make sure that there is an open culture that allows people to come and speak? So how do you make sure people have a place where they come and talk and they are genuinely listened to around their concerns? And there's a big talk of psychological safety. If you've got an area where people can feel safe, they can come and speak, they can talk things through, they've got an open relationship with you or their direct, you have a flexible way of working. We've just come through a very difficult time in the world, and flexible working has become very much the norm. How does that support? That doesn't suit everyone. That people who are in shop serving people, or in restaurants, or in a factory environment, or a call centre, well, maybe not call centres as much now, but they do have to be in a place of work. So how do you make sure there's some flexibility around that? There is certain amounts of movement you can do on, say, breaks, or people's working patterns, starting early, finishing late, whatever that might be to suit them. So if you'd have those conversations to help people understand it. Is that physically safe? Is the environment that you've got people working, is it clean? Is it tidy? Is it too warm, too cold? Is it too dark? Have you done all them normal, what they call hygiene factors are right? Is the rest areas clean and ready for people to use? Is the food in the vending machines? And away from those kind of softer areas, more tangible areas, you can move to the more softer ones. So, do you have awareness and training for people who are line leaders? So that I've just mentioned mental health first aiders in the UK. That's a great way of doing it. You train people up on a course and they understand, and they're first aiders exactly as a first aider would work in a mainstream sort of area where you have first aiders to make sure physically they're not being hurt. You can do the same with the mental health first aiders who go there as a point to get to in case there is any kind of issues. You need to make sure there's information and services available, because sometimes people won't want to talk in work, but they would like to speak to someone. So having a good organisational number that people can ring, or a set up of lines of helplines that they can get to, and the information's there, so they feel they can reach out and speak around issues. Because a lot of the issues aren't going to be at work. They are going to be outside of work. Back to the idea of the funnel and the bucket, it's just going to get fuller and fuller. And you might just have 5% or 10% which might be work, but the other 90% of the pressure in that bucket will be outside work. So they'll want to talk around those things and how we can help with those. And other things around it is, how do you make sure your work is stimulated enough? So, because sometimes boredom can be a big driver in people's psychological feelings. If they don't feel part of a team, they don't feel like they're doing something useful, they feel that they're bored, there's no interest, it's too repetitive, they don't feel part of that bigger group and belonging. And that's definitely something as a leader you can work on. How do you get people to feel part of something bigger, enjoy it, get their feedback on it? And that leads into the last point on this, is around communications. Have people got information out there? Do they understand where the first aiders are, what they're there to do? Is there some sort of code of conduct that you should have in your business to make sure that people don't feel like they're being bullied or intimidated at work, so they can feel psychologically safe? How do you communicate that out? Is that through briefs? Is that through newsletters? Is that through emails? How do you use that so that they know where to go to and confidentially can speak to someone? A lot of businesses have moved away from a traditional HR model where you may have had a human resources department, as you used to call it, or I can't remember what to call them in the days of old, but they were very much there as someone who you could speak to. You could go and see them around issues like this. A bit different now. A lot of companies have a different model with that, but your managers need to take that spot. I always speak around being good one-to-ones, good feedback loops, making sure people know their people, open and willing to communicate around these things. So have a look at how you do that in regards to that. And of course, you've got to think to yourself now, I've got some real responsibilities, as in health and safety, where most managers and leaders have got very much accountability for things. You've got to start thinking, what as a manager can I do? You've got to be looking at the issues. What are the issues that are going to really affect the people around you? And have you used a risk assessment? Are you putting people in areas where it is a stressful environment, that you've put too much pressure on them? You could do a mental health first aid risk assessment and look at where areas may or may not be a concern. And that's a really good starting point for you, because then you can assess the risk like you would do with a physical risk and see what you can do to change it. Are people working long, extended hours? I've definitely found in the last few months that the guys have really put a lot of effort in. And numbers of times I've gone up to them and said, you need to get yourself home a little bit earlier today. I've noticed you've done early starts and late finishes, you've been on calls, you've been really engaged, and that's great, and I want you to be engaged and I want you to be successful, but actually I'm concerned, and I think you should have some time off. Why don't you take some time off? Or on the reverse, I've had people in my team come and saying, I've had such a tough week, Matt, I'm thinking of having a Friday afternoon off. I really just want to go whack some golf balls round. I'm like, go for it. You just go for it. Thank you for having an honest conversation with. Thank you for opening up. And you go enjoy that time, because I know they've put the effort in. I know they've put more than their hours in, and giving that little bit back. And of course, if you've got a risk assessment, you've seen some risks, then put a plan in place to try to fix those risks, reduce those risks. Educate, train, and promote the idea that mental health isn't an issue in regard to promotion, in regard to anything in that business. Like I said earlier, the days have gone when it ends careers. These are things that are affecting people all the time, are things that can be dealt with if they're hit in the right way and treated in the right way. I mean, if someone's got a flu or cold or COVID, We wouldn't think that right for an end of career, but for some reason there's still a bit of stigma about mental health. And we do need to get people to be educated, train your teams to spot it, and then promote the fact that it's a good thing to do. And of course, plan the reduction of those risks you mentioned earlier. Is it around exposure time? Is it around personal strengths? Have your people got the right jobs? If you've got someone who's constantly under stress and feels like they're at breaking point constantly, are they in the right role? Realistically, are there something they should be somewhere else? Have their personal strengths and personal ideals not fit to the job they're in? And you can get that. People almost burn themselves out because they think they have to keep going against that wall. And sometimes you've got to stand away and go, this is really not for me. This is not the job. You've got to be open about that and help that person find the right role for them. And sometimes that might not be in your business. But isn't that better than someone having mental health issues in the future? I'll leave that question open for you to think about. And then, as with HSE, and so health and safety, we have KPIs. So why not mental health KPIs? How do we measure our engagement? How do we measure how much we've done to help people? How do we measure that in tangible ways, but also in the intangible? How often do we get those conversations that with people going to ask them? And of course, away from work, how often do you speak to your friends and families and just ask them how they are? Have you ever reached out and gone, how are you? Are you in a good place? What's happening in your world? Because that's also another way of getting people to open up. And really, if there is an issue, hopefully they'll come and speak to you. And I've spoke about mental health first aiders, those first line of defence, if you like, against that. You can use external support through occupational health, which is the numbers I've spoke about. But of course, you've got to think of that mental health matters. Not morally and ethically, it's the right thing to do. But it's also good for your business because it delivers the results you need, because people feel better, they feel more engaged, they obviously feel well. You can't reduce it all. There is challenges in our world and challenges within people. It means that you can't fix everything, but you need to help those people, because by doing that, you're going to reduce the amount of time they're away from work. You're going to reduce the fact that they don't enjoy the work, that they're actually being productive. You increase productivity, you're going to reduce the cost of sickness, you're going to have a more productive workforce. You're going to have a happier workforce. They'll more feel wanted, they'll engage more in the future. So, as we come to the end of this, I think there's a few things you need to take away. Firstly, how are you yourself? No, genuinely, how are you yourself? Have you asked yourself that question? And if you're not right, and you know that you're not right, and there's things that are bothering you, how are you going to get support? Because that's the first thing. And then how are your team? Have you done those basic risk assessments around, is it a right place for them? Have you done that idea of physically, is it a good place? Have you got an open culture to discuss things? Have you trained people to look for the signs? And have you communicated to people how and when they can get help? And of course, as every time I do this podcast, genuinely, especially on this subject, if you've heard something and you really need to get some help or get some support, or you do, then please reach out. Either to myself, I'd be really happy to help people, but also to anybody else around them. Have you asked for some support? Because the last thing I want you to do is listen to this and not do anything. And of course, to end the show, as I always do, I'd love to hear some feedback on the show and others. So if you do feel like giving me some feedback, as it's a gift, then please email to managermattpodcast@gmail.com. I really would love to engage on new and old topics around management, leadership and life in general. Well, that's it for Manager Matt this week. Thanks for listening and goodbye.
Thank you so much for listening to this Manager Matt podcast. We hope you found it interesting, helpful and actionable. One last thing, please leave a quick review on iTunes or with your podcast provider, as it helps to spread the word of Manager Matt. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the podcast, and if you did like anything in particular, send an email to managermattpodcast@gmail.com or visit managermatt.co.uk for more content. Feedback is a gift, so let's keep giving. See you next week.